a vow we made to each other, not to discuss specifics, of course, because she can't. But my real keen interest is in basically the lacking in ISKCON of the different aspects of the community. I mean, the community, the victims, the families of the victims, the leaders, every person in the community, how
we should be live on Facebook now, sorry.
Yeah, we've gone live.
Okay.
That's okay, Roger. You were still mid-sentence. You can finish off what you were saying.
Oh, just that, you know, there's really no basis or foundation for devotees to understand how to respond to abusers, whether the devotees are the victims or the families or leaders or people in the community, friends, anything. There's the aspect that many people have had decades-long relationships with abusers, and they don't know how to reconcile, how to deal with their, newly revealed other side, or even if it's known that it's sort of been swept under the mat. So people don't really know how to respond. This topic really fascinates me, the forgiveness and compassion, because it's so cheaply bandied about in ISKCON. It's an excuse for everything. And it's like, if you're not walking around forgiving and being compassionate to abusers, you're a piece of crap, and you really should be made to feel that way. That's kind of
maybe I can just say a few words by way of scene setting, because we don't know quite yet how many people are watching.
4 people on Facebook.
What's that?
There's 4 people on Facebook.
4 people on Facebook so far. Hopefully more will join as we go. So thank you all for joining, both those who are watching the live stream, those who've dialed into Zoom. It's still not too late to join Zoom. You just click on the link below in the invitation. We've got the following devotees here: Arjuna Prabhu, family man, and our tech wizard for this particular thing, and also someone who is a really passionate preacher, and particularly some apologetics of theism generally. So doing some great stuff. We have Shanaka Rishi Prabhu in the UK. It probably doesn't need many introductions for anyone been following this topic for the last few years. Has really been spearheading creating awareness. We have Braja, writer and editor extraordinaire there in Mayapur, and there's someone who has also a passionate stake. As we're just hearing. We have Akrura Prabhu. Maybe you could just say a couple of words, Akrura, about who you are. About who you are.
Oh, I have been doing life coaching for devotees for 20 years. And I joined in the last millennium, ISKCON. It was a long time ago. At the moment, I'm doing integrity partnership with devotees.
Nice.
Integrity partnership is a type of mutual coaching where we specifically work on personal integrity, and we set integrity goals every week. And my interest in child protection has to do with my stepdaughter, and I started getting involved with this when I met her. She was small. And then the videos of Sanaka Rishi Prabhu really kind of inspired me to do anything to help, anything I can to help, especially in the area of prevention. Because what has been done, we cannot change it, but we can do, I think, a lot to prevent child abuse, and especially to educate children and parents before they even come into a situation to be abused, to be completely ready and educated and well aware that this is the material world, anything can happen, and that they have options how to protect themselves.
Thank you for joining. Okay, my name's Damodar. Amongst many things, I've been around ISKCON from the 70s and 80s. I've led at different times. These days I work as a consultant and coach, a little bit like Akrura. I'm a father and a grandfather. We've got generations of people in the family who've had the Gurukul experience. Radha, my wife, went to the first Dallas Gurukul. Our 3 kids together went to Gurukul at various stages, and now we've got grandchildren who are just starting to enroll in Bhaktivedanta Gurukul here in Australia. So very interested. If I can say a little bit about how Lady Choir began and how Shanika and I got started talking about this. Shanika was quite surprised possibly when I contacted him to say, hey, maybe you can have another crack at this this push for improving child protection. I think I was someone who was expressing some misgivings about some of the video content, which was creating great awareness. And so maybe he was a little surprised that suddenly I wanted to support him. But I've certainly become increasingly aware that our society has so far to go. And Akura, you've mentioned one of the things. I think probably kids are getting a better ride now than they did in the early days when there was a lot of naivety and I think there's a lot more duty of care generally being expressed by parents, by teachers, by those running schools. But I don't think it's consistent across the globe. I gather there are really good CPO policies and a good CPO office with some dedicated devotees in different places, but we don't have total global coverage. They've put some great policies in place. I gather they've had feedback that these are really quite world-class policies. They're poorly funded, and some of that may represent how limited GBC funds are generally, but you know, there are also quite a lot of quite wealthy people on the GBC who, some of which contribute, some say they'll contribute and don't contribute, and some are yet to really contribute. We're also worried. I know Shanika and I have spoken about the still attitudes maybe towards abuse that are too light on offenders. Either CPO conduct an investigation and maybe one of the leaders who's friends with the abuser sort of intervenes and asks for a lighter sentence or challenges perhaps the nature of the investigation or the legitimacy of findings, but that's pretty horrible. Sometimes after the investigations are all completed, they argue for lighter sentences or just ignore the CPO recommendation. So these are particularly horrific things. And as Akura was saying, they create an environment where there's not sufficient deterrent, that someone can almost get away with abuse with impunity. And that's the problem. And then, yeah, there's other things that we've spoken of, such as you know, proper support for victims. And of course, if victims don't see the society taking the right actions to prevent abusers, you know, maintaining high positions and so on, then that really feels like a slap in the face, adding insult to injury. So one of the things that we spoke about and we envision having a series of these conversations, Shanika, was you were talking about forgiveness. And on the one hand, it's a really important thing for someone who's been abused to help progress at some stage in life. But it's also not something that can simply be insisted by them, and it's certainly not anyone else's position to do. So we know that we have things like, you know, even the most vulnerable activity, if they're still sane. There's perhaps a lot of misdirected compassion and other things that go on here. Not uncommon to lots of religious organizations. So maybe you can set the scene for us a little bit around this topic of forgiveness and how you'd like to approach that.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, if you can hear me, I'll let's try, because I'm you were breaking up a lot on my end.
Oh, I was.
Well, I can't hear very well, but if you can hear me, then let me know if it's a bad line. I might exit and come back in to see if I get a better connection. I don't know. It's a very complex topic, and I think I find that complexity is always, there's an element of uneasiness when I have to deal with complex situations. There's a part of me that would like black and white, yes and no answers, simple, that I can put them in a box and really have it simple, but that's not the reality. There are so many perspectives, there are so many considerations. So then just to, mainly you have the perspective, the social perspective. So what's the social responsibility? Then we have the perspective of the victim and the perspective of the perpetrators. There's at least these three perspectives, which are very different, and each of these three parties has its own responsibility in how they respond to abuse and relate to forgiveness. From a social perspective, it's important that, Ramani, please don't do that. From a social perspective, it's important that the society is does not disrespect victims, doesn't encourage abuse. So if society doesn't have a clear stance on their position on with regards to especially child abuse, which is, as we said in our last conversation, it's the ugliest manifestation of our abusive consciousness as conditioned jivas. So if a society, not just ours, if any society doesn't have a clear stance on what their position is with regards to abuse, then automatically they encourage abuse because there is no deterrent.
You were saying recently when we spoke that you feel that even attitudinal settings in the community are either too forgiving or too lax, or, yeah, I can't remember exactly how you characterized it, but I wonder if you could say a little bit about that, because I think there are these two fronts. There's what should ISKCON's leaders be doing, and what should every single member of any community that has children be doing to, A, create a more safe environment, B, to ensure that there is zero tolerance for abuse. Because I think you were saying we still have an environment where, yeah, it's too soft on abusers.
I think, yes, I do think that the social environment is soft on abuse in ISKCON. There is a reluctance to take a strong position against abusers, both at an individual level and at a collective level as a society. So socially, we don't have a clear, consistent position from our leadership. It's there is like a two-tier justice system. If you are well connected, then you have this
amnesty.
You get a preferential treatment. If you are a nobody, then you get the full brunt of the force of ISKCON's justice, which is it doesn't suggest a very enlightened consciousness.
If I were to ask you to almost provide one or two key messages that you think you would love ISKCON's leaders to consider regarding their responsibilities, their duty of care, their thought process about this kind of topic, what are the sort of summarized key points?
It's I mean, from the Vaishnava Vedic perspective, the leader is responsible for the a part of the karma, positive and negative, and the devotional credits of their subjects. So it's not even in their own best interest to disregard this. It's destructive on so many levels, and it undermines the reputation of ISKCON as a society. It undermines the faith of the members in the leadership, in the society. It creates confusion all over, and what to speak of the devastation that it causes to the victims themselves. Something I wanted to elaborate on, which is kind of veering away from what we're talking now, is the perspective of the victim. So for myself, as I don't like to identify myself as a victim, but as a child, I had some difficult times in Gurukul. So from that perspective of me as a victim, then the paradigm changes completely. I have, I don't want to say the word duty because it carries a lot of negative connotations, and it carries, but in a sense, yeah, I have the duty to myself to forgive. Now, having said that, forgiveness is not an artificial intellectual imposition. Forgiveness is like true, authentic forgiveness is something that can only come about through some divine. You need Krishna's mercy, divine intervention, grace. It's not an intellectual decision, but at least understanding the importance for me to forgive. That's essential. It's like, it is in my best interest to forgive. Until I'm able to forgive fully, I will be living my life with the shadow of what, as a victim, which means that I am defined by the abuse that I suffered as a child. So it's like, until I forgive, I'm still bound by that event that took place.
Looks like Braja wants to come in, so let's just pause for a moment. Let's bring Braja in. It looked like you were about to say something there. I'd also like to encourage, there's perhaps people watching who can send messages either on the Zoom group chat if they're part of the Zoom group, or possibly even just private messages to myself or any of the other participants. If you prefer to remain anonymous, just let us know that you're preferring to remain anonymous. I have got a couple of anonymous comments here. They should consider it a crime, first and foremost, and it's not an ordinary offense like an accidental fall down. So, Braja, you've been waiting to come in for a little while. What are your thoughts?
Well, it was just something you said, Shanaka, about forgiveness, how it's not an intellectual, it's not a delineated process that's written down. You follow that process, boom, you reach the end, and that's it. And it does have many different elements, but I think in some respects it is an intellectual process because, or at least part of it is, and that's for everyone, not only the victim, but the thing that's missing is the environment to forgive. There is no structure or no environment to forgive except for, what you said, that people will quote Shastra or they know the philosophy, when in fact they don't. They're just quoting a little bit that they do know that supports, forgiveness and compassion, and you're expected to fall into line with that very limited knowledge, which has no applied field. It's just knowledge. And I think it was Einstein who said, knowledge without application is absolutely useless. So what we're seeing in ISKCON is, you know, we all know what forgiveness and compassion is, but there's no application because there's no environment to put it in. Like, for example, it's not only the leaders who are acting wrong in their approach to things. It's you know, like I was saying, it's abusers, abused family, friends, the community, the worldwide community, devotees in general. They don't know how to respond. The leaders in many respects are enabling abusers, and devotees are made to feel bad at being angry, or they don't want to be gaslighted or shamed into thinking that they're wrong, or silenced by senior devotees who stream off shastric responses that are...
Don't be offensive.
Appropriate. Yes, don't be offensive. And you should be forgiving and compassionate. Like, you know, the most popular quote from the Gita, which is, you know, 9:30, apichetsu durachara. Even if one commits the most abominable offense, they should be forgiven. But there's a reference in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, I think, King Vena.
Yeah.
You know, and the saints who advised him, their conclusion was that he was viparyaya, which is what does viparyaya mean? Wrong knowledge.
Okay.
You know, they have this wrong knowledge. Now, basically, it translates in English as a perverted mentality. Now, you can't communicate or reason with a person who doesn't understand how wrong they are, or that they're not going to be easily forgiven, or that some people can't deal with them, or that they don't belong around devotees, or that they shouldn't be anywhere near a spiritual organization. They shouldn't be anywhere near any kind of institution. It's a perverted mentality. It's perverse intelligence, not a perverted mentality.
Maybe I can, sorry, you go.
And, you know, this Apichetsu Durachara verse 9:30 in the Gita, Prabhupada says 12 times accidental fall down or fall down. And abusers are not falling down. It is viparyaya. It's a perverted intelligence. It's outright wrong. You cannot compare the two. You can't compare, you know, forgiving a devotee for a fall down or a mistake with an abuser's perverted intelligence. And that perverted intelligence is displayed when the community and families and the abused and everyone doesn't see the abuser making reparation, trying to resolve, apologizing, doing anything active to try and get the forgiveness. And that's like in that pastime in Bhagavatam about King Vena, you know, the saintly men advised King Vena, and because he had this viparyaya, they could not reason with him. And their conclusion was kill him. Of course, we can't kill people.
But that would be fitting. I mean, the point is, it's such an egregious transgression. It shows absolutely no moral restraint. It shows absolutely no self-control, judgment. But at the very least,
you go back to viparyaya, and you know, you're talking about people who are trying to make reparation, or, you know, come back into the fold of devotees, like we've seen lately, or people who argue, the abusers who argue that they haven't really done anything wrong. And, you know, it's, people are wondering how to deal with these abusers and how to approach them, and should we be forgiving and compassionate? And they don't actually know, because, like I said, there's no field to apply, you know, shastric knowledge in. There is no environment that encourages, you know, full knowledge. And like I was saying, Shanaka, you said it's not an intellectual process, but for a part of it, it is. And that intellectual process section, that small section of it, means actually understanding Shastra, understanding these people, understanding how to identify, you know, what is wrong with their behavior, you know, how you can't just say, you know, forgive and be compassionate. You can't just say they've got a great service record. You can't say any of that.
Well, maybe I can jump in. Maybe I can jump in and build on some of the things that you're saying. Would that be okay?
Sure, I'll just...
I cut you off in mid-flight. Yeah, finish up.
because, you know, everything that comes from that mentality of Viparjaya is fruit from a poisonous tree. You cannot speak of their social, their social position, their service record. You can't apply any of those things to an abuser's, you know, good qualities or whatever, or reasons to forgive them and show compassion, because until that Viparjaya is fixed, unless it's recognized, unless they're functioning from the point of acknowledging that they have a perverted intelligence, then nothing they do after is actually genuine. It's fruit from the poisonous tree of perverted intelligence. Even if it looks like devotional service or sounds like devotional service, it's not. They've already destroyed everything they'll do in the future. And Krishna confirms that in the Bhagavatam when he says, like you and Shanaka have pointed out, you can't forgive someone for offenses to a devotee. Only that devotee can. It's up to the victims to do it. But then
well,
back to it's the environment. We have a faulty environment. So how to do it?
Well, just building on that, you mentioned that it's an intellectual process, and
no, partly a small part, I said.
Yeah, small part. But depending on the age when someone actually suffered this abuse, it could be quite pre-rational. And it can have such a deep emotional impact that it scars their attitudes towards Krishna consciousness. It's almost inseparable in their minds, especially if it was a person of trust, a person who's supposed to be held in high esteem, that's abused that kind of privilege and power.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things my sense is that helps someone progress to the stage of forgiveness is to feel that they've seen and the injury that's happened to them has been properly acknowledged, not just by themselves, but that the community has recognized. Of course, if the community is seen not to take sufficient action and go easy on the offender and potentially even have them still exist in positions of power or still have all of the privileges afforded to anybody else, they feel that their injury hasn't actually been recognized by the community. So it perpetuates, it makes it difficult. I gather that one of the stages of forgiveness is you know, there's some kind of admission or acknowledgement generally by others. Yes, you have, this wrong thing has happened to you. And if you're still almost fighting to be heard and recognized, you know, that would be a really, really challenging thing. So I think you've absolutely made some of the right calls here that somehow the compassion gets misdirected. The victim gets lectured that they should move on, they should forgive, they should maintain.
Well, it's like you were saying,
grievances.
The victim is often, you know, it happens at a very young age. They cannot form the intellectual structure
of course,
to create any sort of response. Meanwhile, the person who abused them has been able to create that structure. And they are seen in the devotional community often as a senior or elder. They're forgiven, they're shown compassion. And like you said, meanwhile, the victim is benched.
Well, and yeah, it's a scary thing that the victim's still dealing with the trauma. They haven't really managed to yet process it out of their system, but they're the ones expected to doing all the growing, all the forgiving and so on. And then, yeah, we're tending to go light. Perhaps, as you say, people's previous track record or the quality of their other relationships is seen to somehow offset. It's horrific. Let's bring some other people in. So Akura's there. And we also have Richard Kitten. We can't see him yet, but he's there. But Akura, what are your thoughts as you hear all of these things being expressed?
It's a delicate thing. And although the victim should be helped the victims should be helped to understand everything that happens in a broader perspective, in a perspective of that it's not an accident that this has happened, and things like, and the karma and the past lives. But this is very delicate, because you cannot do this too early to help people to understand that nothing is an accident, and that Krishna is in charge of everything, Krishna sees everything, Krishna allows things to happen. Even in Krishna's times, I mean, Kamsa was killing kids left and right like anything. So that's one thing. But another thing, okay, I don't know, counseling victims, this is, I don't think even I can do that myself. Sometimes I have people coming to me and I'm trying to speak to them in a deeper way, spiritual way and things like that, but I'm not telling them just forgive.
Trauma counseling is specialized, isn't it?
Huh?
Trauma counseling is actually a specialized skill. You actually want someone who's got professional training. It's dangerous for people back their own just natural ministerial preaching kind of skills, because they'll tend to adopt a non-empathic approach. Sorry to interrupt. Please keep going, Akur.
Yeah. So, but I think this, like, okay, we can blame leaders. We can say leaders are responsible, and of course, if they are too lenient, they are responsible. If they are too lenient with abusers, but I like Sanaka Rishi's Prabhu point that child protection is everyone's responsibility. So I myself feel guilty that I'm not contributing. This is why I'm joining this group, that I'm not contributing to child protection enough, and I'm not screaming against, leniency and things like that. And I think it's everybody's responsibility. And if the victim feels that this whole, like this whole community is weird because they are just, everybody's quiet, nobody's helping me. Not only leaders, but the whole community, I think it's irresponsible. And therefore, I think anybody who can contribute something, they should.
Someone's typing,
yes.
I think, somewhere. Maybe they can mute while typing. Sorry, keep going, Akura.
I don't see, you think on the page, typing? Aha, somebody is typing on the keyboard. Yeah, so as I mentioned
I got the wrong one. I was trying to mute. I think it's Braj typing. I muted her. Okay, go.
I was muted by the host, okay?
I got the wrong one.
So as I mentioned, I want to mention to this group what I told two of you before is I think we should really invest energy in prevention, educating the parents, and if parents are more involved in monitoring what's happening in the school and in the lives of their kids, especially if they are in the boarding school, then you can reduce the possibility. And I mean, I think nobody should object after so much abuse. Nobody who works in the school or is in charge of a school should object to being monitored more closely.
I believe there are some kind of workshops that are delivered in various places. We may not have the type of coverage everywhere that we need. And again, it's the kind of thing where sometimes there are sort of political impediments that seem to, prevent some of those workshops from taking place. I agree that, if we could nail prevention, then almost the rest of the problem goes away. And of course, it's preferred that someone never have to suffer than we simply, tackle abusers appropriately. I've got another upload here, anonymous upload, which I'll read. As a society in ISKCON, we need to create an environment where devotees are really aware of what abuse is. So I think that turns into what you're saying. And more importantly, the impact of it on a victim. Yeah, another great point, because if we're trying to preach to somebody and get them to move on prematurely and we haven't provided enough empathic support, but we went philosophical, all they really take from that is no one cares, no one believes me. They are in some ways diminishing the severity of what I've experienced, that they, minimizing the impact. And how that can hamper the spiritual lives. I mean, to me, this is almost the most egregious part. Yes, there's what they experience, which is horrendous, but if it permanently adversarially impacts their relationship with Krishna consciousness such that they miss some of the opportunities that they were born into. I mean, this is the thing. There's such a sacred and trust in terms of being the parent or even the community. They say it takes, you know, a village to raise a person. The whole community has this responsibility to create that environment. And this is a massive, massive community failing. Let me just finish it off, Raja, and then I'll bring you in. If that's not understood, how it impacts people, as it isn't now, we end up almost ignoring the victim and supporting the abuser, especially if they're well known. If devotees knew the impact, they wouldn't be so keen to jump in to defend. That's why we need more and more training and awareness. So big echoing, I think, of what you were saying, Akura. Raja, you wanted to come in, and let's give Arjuna and Krishna and anyone else a chance.
So many different angles, which there are. There's just countless angles to cover in this topic. But it can just sort of expand and expand and expand if we don't kind of stay focused on the forgiveness and compassion. I'm not asking this to myself, but, you know, a devil's advocate, asking for a friend, devil's advocate kind of question, you know, about what you just said. Ideally that it doesn't happen. Do you actually think that's possible? Kali Yuga?
As in denial, just outright denial?
No, I mean, you know, you're saying about the victims and the situation that, you know, they experience, how they're dealt with by the community, and ideally that, you know, we'd like to see that, you know, child abuse doesn't happen. My devil's advocate question is, do you actually believe that's possible? Kali Yuga.
Well, the tragic thing, it is all too common, but that doesn't make it okay. It is always a massive community failing when it happens. And a society, you know, that Prabhupada has informed and set up, we've been better equipped than almost any other community on the planet with the tools. So it is shocking where, right, you know, we fail to take adequate preventative measures. We fail to provide adequate support. We fail to tackle abusers as they should be tackled. That's, I mean, it's possibly, I mean, there are perhaps a couple of other, we could say the big ISKCON Guru fall downs, we could say the editing of the books controversy, but I'd put this right up there in the top 2 or 3 things that has done the most damage reputationally to the society, the most damage to the collective faith levels. What to speak of losing subsequent generations of devotees. I mean, conversion is already slowed way up by comparison to the early explosion, and more children are being born into the society. If we don't figure out how to provide the right environment for them to grow in Krishna consciousness, what are we doing? Let's give Arjuna a chance, and then let's circle back to Shanika. Arjuna, you've been listening to all of this.
Yeah, I have got some notes. I just had to transfer my son from one bed to the other. I should go through them in order. So a few points. One is there's always a challenge of whether to do something which is better for the society or better for the individual. So certain policies may be the best thing for the greatest number of people, but the punishment may not necessarily be the best thing for the person being punished. So that's one thing to consider. Of course, if somebody is creating victims, then they're the one that should get hard done by, you know, and protecting innocent people is obviously more important. But that's just a dynamic to be aware of.
Well, can I explore that with you, just not to leave it, and sure, hopefully you'll be able to regather your thoughts.
Yeah, I've got notes, I'll be fine.
Yeah. So yes, we do have to balance.
Oh, you gotta face the mic. You'll go quiet when you point away.
Okay, sorry. Shanika was saying something similar. You know, there are lots of different stakeholders here. There's community members, there's parents, there's the leaders, there's the abuser, there's the abused. All of them have needs and interests whenever these things happen. But I would have thought that the abuser, in taking that level of transgression, the considerations about being kind to them should be at the back of the queue. They should come after every other, and the abused individual's needs should be paramount. And other people, you know, impacted. If we somehow get that hierarchy of importance the wrong way up, it does. It's what we're talking about, this environment in which abuse can thrive. Anyway, I apologize, Arjun, I interrupted you there. You'd have a few other notes.
Yeah, I've got a few points. That's fine. I was just going to leave that one. So that could segue into my next point, which is that a question I was going to ask Shonika when he was talking is it that people have incredulity? Do they just not believe that the action was committed by that person? Or do they believe it was committed, but they're just sentimental? And it's like, oh, but I like him and I don't want him to suffer, so we shouldn't punish him.
Well, let's give Shonika a chance to answer, and then we'll give you your other questions. Shonika, let's hear your thoughts on that question.
In my experience, there's been both. Incredulity has played has been a factor. So, for example, you have a devotee who has been assuming, like, try to, how do you say, get in the shoes of a senior GBC member. You've known a devotee for your entire devotional life. Maybe you've even known this person. Maybe this person was there before you joined. So when you joined, this person was already senior to you. And all the interactions you've had with this person, you've only ever seen them, they've only ever been nice to you. You've only ever seen them as being nice to others. And then you hear the most horrendous, atrocious accounts about this person. You say, no, that's not the person I know. It's hard to believe, especially the more extreme the accounts are, the harder it is to believe. So that's a factor. And then when they are presented with overwhelming evidence, so let's say there is 50 or 100 testimonies, and they say, okay, it's like what people often forget is that nobody advertises abuse. Every perpetrator, or just about every perpetrator, is aware that what they're doing is wrong. So it's not so when I was in Gurukul, some of the teachers that were in Gurukul did not know that what the perpetrators were doing. So they were in the same school, colleagues. So one teacher was abusing children and the other teachers didn't know. So when the reports came out, the teacher said, no, I was there in the school, I didn't know. Well, it's not something that takes place in public. It's always behind closed doors. So you have an adult, it's the word of an adult against the word of a child. And if the adult, or if the perpetrator is a senior devotee with a lot of influential friends, then the position of the victim becomes very difficult for the victim to be heard and to be believed. And then there is also situations where the evidence is overwhelming and they say, okay, something must have happened, but surely it can't be as bad as they say. So there is minimization of the problem, or there is, if it happened, then we go into all of those things that Braja was talking about. Yeah, but the devotee should forgive, and this and that and the other. Anyway, that's kind of a short answer to your question. Back to you.
Back to you,
okay.
Arjun.
We could obviously talk about that for quite a long time. I mean, I'd say the solution to lots of that is education. Like psychologists are well aware that children do not talk about abuse in an exaggerated way. They're very awkward talking about those kinds of things. It's very private, and it can go on for years before they say anything to anybody. So if children are talking about that kind of thing, it's generally true. They've done a lot of studies on it, and children generally do not lie about that kind of thing. And even when they do talk about it, they generally down talk it. Although for a lot of victims, the police do know that you need to knock about 10% off of the victim's claims about what was done, because they will tend to exaggerate things in their mind. But 10% is not nearly as much as what some devotees want to knock off in forgiving these people. So some other points. Well, one is there's our own personal attitude. So, you know, like me, I've not been exposed to any of the stuff, but I could read about it and start being like, oh, I hate this devotee, and get all these bitter feelings. And then I'm not thinking about Krishna, I'm thinking about hating somebody for something. And that's not good for my consciousness. So we can have the correct attitude towards something without having to become bitter about it ourselves. So, and that just, you know, like one example I like is, you know, oh, you're locking your car. Are you scared? No, I'm not scared. It's locked. So if we have the correct systems in place and the correct, you know, societal structures so these things get dealt with well, then I don't need to harbor bitter feelings towards these people and spend my time meditating. I can just be like, it's being dealt with, and worry about something else. And when I'm dealing with it, I'm doing it in an intelligent way, and my feelings are there. You know, I'm trying to do the right thing, and I don't have to harbor resentment. Of course, for a victim, it's a different thing because there's a whole emotional side of it, and they can't so easily switch which way they go with their feelings.
I think you've also touched on another instinct possibly that leaders have, which is this is going to create reputational damage. Let's try and deal with it quietly, minimal amount of fuss. It won't disturb anybody's faith. Now, somewhere in there probably are some legitimate concerns for the society, but there's also, again, an absolute misdirection of responsibility. The society becomes a much better place if it's known to tackle these things as opposed to conceal them, cover them up, play them down, and so on. So yeah, that's
point on that.
Yeah, Bridget.
I'm always going to go back to the same point. Every time someone makes a point, I'm going to go back to the same thing. That, like Arjun Prabhu just said, it's about education. Mm-hmm. You can't stop people from responding in the wrong way or being in doubt or not knowing what to do if they're not educated. And that's what we're missing right across the board. And one of the points that Arjun brought up was, you know, if the car's locked, I'm not scared. Basically, if the education is there, people are protected. And one part of that education is understanding whose role it is to be concerned with this. Because, you know, he's saying I'm having bad thoughts about people. Well, okay, there's people who can deal with these sorts of situations in a way that it doesn't make them feel bad. It's simply their duty. That's their varna or ashram or character or whatever. You know, if you've got the right people in leadership positions, they know how to swiftly deal with these things. Clearly, we don't have that. You know, we don't have, you know, Kshatriyas leading. We have the Brahminical order leading. We've got the sannyasis and gurus, which is just topsy-turvy. It's just not how it should be. It's how it was established, but I'm sure it's not how Prabhupada wanted it to continue. So without the right people in the right places giving the right advice and education, none of the community is going to understand how to respond. So everyone's going to be wanting to kill that guy. Everyone's going to be having bad feelings. Everyone's going to be getting angry and demanding what's going on, and we need to, because no one is doing the role at the top. It's just not structured properly. We don't have it.
Yeah, it's a great point. That is another of the things that obviously these subjects are so distasteful that naturally a person with a refined consciousness feels disgust and may not want to deal with it. But you can't be a leader and not want to get your hands dirty, especially on something like this. You can't sit in the seat of responsibility and fail to take decisive action because, well, and we see this has practically, you know, derailed the entire Catholic Church. I don't know how they still managed to keep their doors open, but you know, we're often following almost the same strategy.
Well, we have the wrong people in the situations where we turn to. If there's a situation and we turn to someone, we've got the wrong person in there. You know, it's like a Prabhupada disciple said to me many, many years ago, you know, Vaishyas aren't going to get involved in a situation without knowing that there's some profit in it. Shudras, they don't know what to think about of any situation, pretty much. Kshatriyas, they're not going to get involved unless it's a situation of righteousness and they know that they'll act to protect people. And Brahmins shouldn't really be involved. They should just be advising. So it's, you know, we've kind of got all these different orders in what should be our Kshatriya class, you know, and so we don't have so many, not no one, but not so many of the people that we can turn to and ask, you know, take this action, act, make us feel like we're being protected, make us feel like Arjun Prabhu said, we don't have bad thoughts. We're not wanting to go out and kill people. We're not, you know, feeling violent towards other devotees who are walking around freely after having inflicted so much abuse on people. There's just something that needs to be filled in, and that is to create the environment for education, forgiveness, compassion, and all the qualities that everybody wants to show. But which
I'm not sure if you guys can still hear me or not because my face is frozen.
We can hear you fine. It's just not the video.
Sorry, Brajan.
That's okay. It's just that was just my point. You know, it's always going to come back to the structure and the environment, to forgive, to see people properly, to know who to turn to. And that's going to be absent as long as there's no education.
So it sounds like an annual, if not more frequent, educational session with the entire community. Perhaps it's broken into, you know, different presentations to different age groups or different, you know, constituent groups, something for the parents, something for temple staff, or even just, you know, a different format for adults and a different format for children. Because it does seem that protective measure is quite possibly the most important aspect. And it does sound like we would respond differently as a community, even if something slips through the net. We respond in a way that's actually much more helpful to victims and much more of a zero tolerance. Arjun, let's just make sure we didn't lose anything on your list because we've been interrupting.
I keep coming up with more, but they're kind of related to points I was already going to make. So regarding the wrong people being the ones running things, that ties into a point that I had written down, which is motivations that you create for a role by making it so when you're in that role, things are really cushy for you. You can even get away with abuse. So I've heard somebody who's a Catholic describe what went on in the Catholic Church and some of the dynamics. And it's really predictable, the outcome that happened based on what they were doing, because I mean, you get in a religious organization like that, a concentration of power, and the priest, especially in the Catholic Church and the Christianity traditionally, was considered, you know, to be quite exalted. So, you know, they speak to God or whatever, and God sends their messages through the priest, so that you can't punish the priest, or I can't remember exactly what their attitude was, but so when they would abuse children, there would be no punishment, and they'd shuffle them around different countries in order to protect them from the law. And then people watch this and think, oh, if I'm a priest, I can do that too. And people go and become a priest because they want to abuse children, because they can see that this is the way to get away with it. And it just creates the worst situation you could imagine, that, you know, coming back to that situation of what's good for the individual and what's good for the society. At the same time, if you have a structure where people that act out are punished and they stop acting, the best thing you can do for the perpetrator is prevent them from committing the crime, because if they commit the crime, it's bad for them. You know, they suffer in the future for reactions. It's bad for everybody. So if you have a structure in place that prevents these things from happening, it's the best thing for everybody. And when you do that, like in the Manu Samhita, when Manu's explaining to the kings and leaders, he says there's no perks. Your job's nothing but hard work. You have to sacrifice for the people who you're looking after. That's all there is to it. There's one perk: people will offer their obeisances to you, and that's it. Other than that, you're working hard to make sure everyone's looked after and everyone's needs are met. And so the motivations for becoming a leader should be nothing more than that intrinsic motivation that you want to do the right thing for Prabhupada and for the society. And if you set it up so that there's all these perks where you become a leader and you're above the law and all these things, then you'll get the wrong people wanting to be leaders.
Great point. I mean, to occupy the position of privilege, but not to actually fulfill all of the attendant duties,
You're a bit quiet.
It's quite a travesty. So I think that's a really, really significant point. I'm mindful that we've probably just got 20 or so minutes left, and I think it would be good for us to go, you know, maybe we can go quickly around and everyone can talk about what their recommendations. So we've got a big emphasis on education, and obviously a big emphasis on leaders, and possibly this is also an educational factor, leaders knowing what their responses should be. I'm going to read another anonymous comment, and then let's go around the houses. Akura hasn't spoken for a while. You can also see that we've got a Nitya Manjari and a Krishna Kirtan on the line who may wish to speak.
There's a comment on Facebook too.
Yeah, let me quickly read this comment, and then maybe Arjun, I'll get you to read that one. So this is an anonymous comment. We do have a system, but we have no anonymity, and there lies the biggest problem. We all know each other. If we saw a crime committed in the temple room, we would act. If it was a robbery, etc. We don't act with child abuse because it happens in secret, and we take the word of the perp because we know them and take their version of events, which will be downplayed. And then a follow-up. If you have a big CPO, Child Protection Office, presence in the temple, it will act as a deterrent for sure. I had a question from what does zero tolerance mean? I think it was introduced by Rudy Giuliani to talk about how not even the slightest infringement in New York would go unpunished by the cops. And then they actually managed to really reduce overall offending significantly. They would arrest the guys with the squeegees cleaning your windows of your cars for jaywalking. And even if there was a broken window in, an industrial area, that make sure it's fixed, because the idea is if that broken window doesn't get fixed, then it gives you a sense that there's no law and order. If you arrest everyone, even for the smallest crime, suddenly everyone's on notice. So zero tolerance simply means we don't give it any room at all to live and breathe. It's dealt with swiftly, it's dealt with very decisively. There's no sympathy actually for the abuser. All of the resources are dedicated to supporting the victim and others. So let's hear other, you said there was another comment.
Yeah, there's a few comments on Facebook. I'll probably just read them, and then if someone wants to comment or not, I'll just keep going. Clifford Kirk said, I feel the foundation of all ISKCON problems is the fanatical party spirit. Our Prabhupada is a very powerful devotee, but part of the Gaudiya line seems the leaders, GBC, etc., have separated Prabhupada too severely and have resentment for all other Vaishnava groups. So lack of real diversity allows a big ego group involved in protecting their mind ego group. So abusive predators just need to say, I'm a Prabhupada man only, and they can do anything. Denial that our we group has abusive perverts in it. ISKCON is a branch of Mahaprabhu's mission and needs to be more connected to the trunk. When the group is fanatical like this, it's a perfect mood for narcissistic, abusive types to flourish.
Thank you. And you say there's a few more, but maybe let's go around the houses. Shanika, you've had criminally too little time, given that you were one of our headline acts here. So what are your thoughts in relation to practical solutions? I know we're not trying to necessarily solve it, and this is education in its rights, but things that leaders can do, things that communities can do.
I think education is important, and that's a community leadership initiative. Going back to the question that Braja asked earlier, when she said the devil's advocate, can child abuse be eradicated entirely? My answer is no. We're in Kali Yuga, you cannot eradicate it entirely. I see the reason why I emphasized the importance of personal responsibility is once I read a book by Scott Peck, and he was talking about responsibility in a relationship. And he said, if there is husband and wife, and there is a problem, the responsibility, each party in any kind of relationship has 100% responsibility for their share. So if you have a situation like ISKCON, where we have, let's say there is 3 stakeholders. There is the perpetrators, there is the society, which includes leadership and members of society, and there is the victims. Each of these 3 stakeholders is 100% responsible for their lives. If me as a victim, I wait for society and leadership to change and to improve before I do anything before I try to do anything about it, I'm not taking responsibility for my life, and I'm putting the responsibility for my life in the hands of a society that may or may not change. And that could and if society says, oh, if society says, well, we're going to wait for our leaders to act, then, and the leaders never act, then where does that take us? Or if we say, well, the perpetrators should reform themselves, and they shouldn't. So essentially, from the victim's perspective, I have the responsibility to do everything I can, whether it's seek help, pray, whatever works, to be able to move on and to be able to somehow transcend, transmute, overcome this challenge. And from the leadership's perspective, they have the responsibility to protect the devotees under their care, to protect the institution, and to understand that protecting children is in the best interest of the reputation of the society, and not vice versa, like it's been. And there is something else I wanted to say, which is highly controversial, which is that because initially I said it's a very complex topic, and it's highly controversial because of how ISKCON has handled child abuse. So if we take the story of Jagai and Madai, there is so many lessons in there. We see that on one hand, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's first response was the response, in his first response, he showed us how devotees are to respond when another devotee is abused. And there was no softness, no compassion, no mercy. He said, I'm going to kill them. That was his response. And obviously, in today's society, we can't kill people, but what it implies that there needs to be a strong, very strong response to abuse of other devotees. Then you have the perspective of the victim, where Nityananda Prabhu says, no, you've done nothing. All I got was from my karma. It's okay, just chant Hare Krishna and chant the holy name, and you'll be fine. Then you have the perspective of the perpetrator. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's a little muffled, but you're good again now.
It says your speaker is not working. Anyway. And then you have the perspective of the perpetrator. They say we've offended so many people. We don't even know who all these people are.
It's bad again.
It's bad.
Not sure what's happening.
Yeah, it says your speaker is not working. Please check your connection. But I'm just speaking on my computer, so
it's fine now. Let's keep going.
Yeah. So the perspective of the from the perpetrator's perspective, Jagai and Madai, they say we can never. They were repentant. They begged for forgiveness, and they went on to live a simple life. They didn't go to. They didn't seek to be gurus. They didn't seek a position of prestige. They didn't seek any kind of. They didn't pursue that. So one thing that there is confusion about in ISKCON is that somehow they say, well, this person, okay, they've made a mistake. Maybe we should give them, we should forgive them, and we should, and forgiveness somehow also implies reinstatement to the highest authority. So it's like, so that's, those two things are not, forgiveness implies full reinstatement, whereas there's two different things. A person can be forgiven, a person can, and it doesn't mean that they have to occupy the highest position. They can serve in a very, that's not what Jagayan Madai did. At the same time, there is also the reality from a Vaishnava perspective is that if Jagayan Madai could
oh no!
Jagayan, can you hear me?
Yes, you looked like you'd frozen, but you were just pausing for thought.
Yeah. At the same time, there is the reality that Jagayan Madai would be the highest gurus we could have after they reformed. So there is all these conflicting and confusing and difficult. And that's why I say it's so complex, because the power of the holy name is such that no sin is too great. No sin cannot be forgiven. But how do we how do we integrate all this all these truths in a way that they're not abused? Because in ISKCON, in my understanding, they have been abused to unacceptable levels. And so I leave it as a question. I'm not saying that it is. So it is a reality that the fact that somebody has committed an offense doesn't automatically disqualify them. But it's also true that I have, with my limited current condition perspective, I haven't seen genuine remorse from the part of perpetrators. It's so rare to see that. What to speak of trying to make amends? That doesn't exist. It's all very self-serving. All the apologies I've seen, they're quite self-serving. So I haven't seen a lot of what I thought was authenticity, and obviously who am I to judge the authenticity of somebody else's actions? But it is a very complex topic. Anyway.
Maybe I can read a quote that is coming here through from Arjun. It's hard to know what impact punishment will have on an individual. Maybe it's been studied. I just raise it as a hypothetical. Zero tolerance means taking action, enforcing consequences for every transgression. So just, I think it ties in with what you're describing there, that when abuse has taken place, it's not that we necessarily have to become more punitive, but absolutely the person needs to be isolated from ever being in a position of being able to cause further risk to another vulnerable human being. It doesn't matter that they may feel that that's harsh to them. It doesn't matter that they may feel that they've reformed. The society needs to be seen to be acting in the interest of the vulnerable parties, as opposed to going light on offenders. There's lots of research that suggests, particularly in cases of paedophilia, that in fact it may never actually be cured, and therefore that risk may never actually be manageable other than absolute restrictions. It would seem absolutely inappropriate, as you're saying, Shanaka, for someone to be in a position of privilege and stature. That sends all the wrong signals. That says we didn't really regard their transgression as a particularly significant thing. We really don't care how this person being held up, particularly as a paragon of virtue, affects those who are victims and so on. So I do feel that, as we discussed earlier, the interest then of the abuser, they're at the back of the queue. Once everyone else's interests and needs have been attended to, then we can think about, and I agree with you, just like you're saying with Jagayan Madai, what's the harm in them taking a very, very humble and lowly position. No one's taking them, no one's stopping them from the ability to render any kind of devotional service. Why do they need statues? Why do they need to go back and run a school or, you know, have access to kids? No, that's just shocking. Mindful that we're down to our last 10 minutes, so let's, Akrura, we haven't heard from you in a good long while. What are your thoughts? What practical things, we've talked a lot about education, what else might we recommend to who?
I would just try to form a team of people who are consultants. It may be some of us here. I mean, definitely Sanaka Rishi Prabhu and yourself, you could be very appropriate for that. If devotees think I could help, I would also join that team. So team of people who are consultants for parents who want to put kids in the Gurukula. And so we can offer this option. Before you put your kids in the Gurukula, you can talk to us. And so we prepare them, educate them, counsel them, support them, whatever, yeah. But speak very openly about what happened and that there is always a risk. And I think parents are so responsible. I think parents have been irresponsible. Parents are so responsible to protect their children. If I would be parent, you better don't be you better don't be a teacher in the Gurukula, you know? Because if you do something to my child, then you will be in trouble. So how parents should become more protective, more responsible, more vigilant, and we can offer that kind of education and counseling.
I'm going to read another couple of comments that have come on our chat and so on. So here's an anonymous comment. Portals of education more important than education, sort of. Hopefully they'll say a little bit more about that. It's like going back a step and seeing how to educate, providing the environment, finding the portal of information and making it available to everyone in the community at all levels. Like devotees are encouraged to study, and we have the VIHE and MIHE and Radhadesh and so on, but it's only, I believe, in Radhadesh where people are actually being educated in child protection. So it's lacking, and that's across the board. It's not just leaders, it's the entirety of the community. Everyone has the responsibility. It's up to all of us. Oops. Up to all of us to provide that portal, that information, that education. I'm seeing another comment, excuse me, I'm struggling to navigate here a little bit. There's another comment. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep it anonymous because I'm not sure if the person wants to be known, but they can chime up if they want to. Hare Krishna, I think the solution is very simple. All pedophiles should be banned for life from ISKCON. The pedophiles can still have their mates visit them at their homes. They can still practice Krishna consciousness at home. Sexual abuse, physical abuse, and rape damages the psyche. To see the rapist or abuser at the temple creates terrible distress mentally and emotionally for the victims and also the family. So many people commit suicide as a result of being raped or abused. We cannot take the risk to allow the pedophiles and abusers to have access to the temples. Thousands of devotees and people stay away from ISKCON now because of this situation. It is awful, awfully mentally destroying for the victims. Also, it is bad for the preaching. There's no problem to ban Ritviks, disciples of other mutts, and questioners. Why is it so hard to ban pedophiles and abusers?
Amen.
That does sound like a really good final word, but maybe Shanika or Arjuna or Braja, did you have any other thoughts?
Well, I like that last point. There's an interesting, sorry, what was it? I was just going to read this comment from Facebook. Jagai and Madai dug a kund with their bare hands and served all the Vaishnavas. I can't remember what you were just saying. Anyway, someone else want to go?
I agree with both Shanika and Arjun that why do these people have to come back and have position to be recognized, to be forgiven by the entire community? Why can they not just be humble like Shanika was saying about Jagai and Madai? They never saw positions of leadership. They didn't want to be the guru. They didn't want to be recognized for their 50 years of devotional service, which, let's face it, is a drop in the eternal ocean. It's really not that much when you're talking about things that are damaging at this level. And yeah, why is it so hard just to ban these people when so many others are banned so easily? There's so many swift decisions made, but this seems to be such a baffling problem.
Well, that raises a point of conflict of interest too. Like the point I was going to make is that the victims have a right to not have to see their perpetrator. Yeah. They should never have to come in contact with that person ever again. Absolutely. And if that means, like, the person shouldn't have to avoid the temple just because they don't want to see the person that abused them, so the person should be banned. That's totally fair. Like Damodar is saying, that the needs of the perpetrator are get the back seat of everyone else.
Yeah. Look, I'm mindful that we're just 2 or 3 minutes away from wrapping up. I'm really grateful to everyone who's joined the conversation and for all the, good points of information that provided. Hopefully, this is one of many such conversations. This in itself is a form of education, and we hope that not only those who tune in, get some value out of these during the live, but actually perhaps the video gets shared. Maybe even some leaders get to see it and actually hear how these thoughts are being considered by thoughtful devotees around the place. I thank everybody and commend everybody for the spirit in which they've conducted the conversation. It is such an ugly matter to discuss. It's natural that tensions run high, and yet everyone's managed to, remain very lucid and thoughtful. So a big thank you. Let's make sure we have these regularly, and I want to particularly thank Shanika for teeing up a very compelling theme for this particular one. That may not be the one and only time that we get this particular chestnut examined. But look, if anyone's watching, feel free to nominate other subject matters. Feel free to join in as participants in future conversations. We're new to this. A big thank you to Arjuna for getting the technology sorted so that we could actually live stream and have everybody online. And big thanks to everyone who gave up 90 minutes of their time to participate. Sincerely hope that through these kinds of conversations we'll gradually, hopefully rapidly, get the society to progress in this really important area of child protection. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, thank you.
Can I make one last point?
Yeah, of course.
So one of the principles I want to bring up is creating situations that prevent this from happening. And one of the principles, I think the Varnashram culture doesn't expect us to be above conflict of interest. That's why there's the Varna system, where some Varnas have some duties and not other duties, so that they don't get conflicts of interest. And the key conflict of interest in this regard is mates making decisions about their mates. And you just can't expect somebody to make a decision that's going to send their mate to jail. It's not something you can expect somebody to do. Everybody's going to be like, no, I don't want this person to go to jail. I really like them. So there always needs to be a thing where the conflict of interest is split up and it's another person making the decision.
Well, in any legal situation, anybody involved in a conflict of interest has to recuse themselves, and that doesn't happen in ISKCON.
Well, that brings up another point. Sorry.
Well, just to the point that was raised earlier, we do seem to swiftly deal with things that challenge the authority of the leaders. So if you think about other mutts or you think about Ritwik, you could say that a leader also has a vested interest in those instances of warding off competitive ideas or charismatic leadership or whatever it may be. Why would that take a higher precedence in the mind of a leader than protecting people from these kind of egregious, personal injuries? So anyway, I'm mindful that it's 8:29, and right. We probably could go on forever, but let's leave people wanting more, and let's have another of these conversations very soon. Hopefully we can make it something like a weekly.
Well, the TOVP bell is chiming, so I think that's a good.
I'll fix the audio and post it online too for the recording.
Hare Krishna, thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Srila Prabhupada.